10, 9, ignition sequence start. All engines are running.
Roger, the clock is operating. We're underway.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're making a big leap ourselves right into Episode 5, the Kerbal Strike Back.
You have failed me for the last time.
Oh, I'm sure I'll fail you many times to come. I am your LMP, Lunar Module Pilot, Biff Aldrin, and with us, our CMP, Command Module Pilot,
Nostromo.
Coming up in Episode 5 of our Kerbalcast today, we will update you on our progress in the game.
We hear your letters in the crew report.
We'll also get the latest Kerbal news in this week's mission briefing.
Another episode of
As the Kerbin Turns. And we go off topic to talk about the movie Gravity in this week's But I Digress.
We also hear your answers to the big question of the week.
Okay, I have a big question of the week.
What is that?
How much progress?
Well, it was about 3 hours.
3
maybe
hours?
4 hours. Okay, I pulled around 60 hours of work this past week. And
You couldn't call in sick?
30
Come
of the-
on, priorities, man. We're talking gaming here. We're talking Kerbaling here, man.
Okay, I'm going to decouple my job.
Decouple?
Just for the Kerbalcast, I'm decoupling.
I think you should unconsciously decouple. For all you Gwyneth haters out there. Word. Now, as we say at the beginning of every podcast, I've been playing the game for about a year. You're a little bit past the 1 month mark.
Yeah, just past a month.
And we're going to cut you some slack this week because you had a tough work schedule, so you didn't get to do too much. But what did you do this week?
Okay, so from the last episode, I told about my caveman reversion. How I just completely lost everything. So I decided
lost everything.
I spent half that time. I spent like an hour or so just going anywhere I could and just siphoning as much science as I could off of Kerbin. And
Are you back to where you were before you lost it all?
I'm actually farther.
Oh, you're further.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
Because the cool thing about Kerbal is like I now know where all that stuff is, so it's like I find it, just instantly.
It may have been only 3 or 4 hours, but it was a very productive 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah. See, that's the thing is every time I go on there, it's like restarting the campaign mode.
Right.
You know exactly how to do everything. So the very first thing you do is you just put a pod out there, get outside, collect the soil sample, go back in science. And you keep advancing through these things. You do it really quickly. So I recouped all the time I lost from the reversion, in like an hour.
Okay.
And the other 2 hours, all the talk about rendezvous.
Right.
I tried it again.
And
so it still hasn't happened yet, but I actually learned a few things that I didn't do last time.
Okay.
So the main error that I was making, because I was like, okay, they're both in an orbit that's close to the same size, but they would get, they would cross. Like they weren't anywhere near parallel or anything like that. I wasn't looking at when I was launching. I wasn't making sure it lined up with where the orbit was. I was just launching, because you
already had a craft in orbit, and then you were launching a second craft.
I would launch the second craft, and I wouldn't look where the first craft was, to see if its orbit had lined up with the launch center. So because you
don't have to do that, but to adjust for the difference, you burn up a lot of fuel that way.
Yeah, and I have this problem with anytime I try to launch something that depends on something else. Is every time I think I hit the launch button, I think I've set the clock back to 0. I think that it's still, year 1, day 1.
Oh, okay. So you're saying every time you reload, yeah, because I've done that. I'll have a rocket sitting on the pad, and I'll speed up the time in the game to get the MUN in the right position. And then if for some reason I have to go back, if I reset, then the MUN's back where it used to be.
Yeah, and you don't remember to half the disasters in Kerbal is forgetting that one little step. Like, oh wait, my stages are out of order when I save this thing.
Right.
I forgot to move them. Or for me, I forget to put on the stabilizer, and I'm like, I launch,
and then go off to the side.
Yeah. So
do you know, honestly, when I started playing the game, I didn't catch on right away that if you push the T key, that kicks in the stabilizer. And my earliest launches were basically 5 minutes of me fighting to keep the thing.
It would go in completely squirrely.
Yeah.
That's how it was until it was like, I think it was the second episode when we were talking. You're like, yeah, you press the T key, and I was like, oh, that was that thing they did in the tutorial I was ignoring. Oh, okay, that's probably important.
Yeah, every time I'd get into the upper atmosphere where it was thin, that's generally when my craft would start spinning like like a hamster in a wheel.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many launches never mind, that one's done.
Yeah.
Well, let's try again and hope that just luck goes in my favor.
Well, I just expended an entire stage and I didn't go anywhere.
Yeah. So and like you said in the last one about rendezvous that you need to try to, recreate your steps when doing something.
Right.
Well, the first one I got into orbit, the VU 1.
The VU 1?
Yeah, rendezvous 1. So it's VU 1. So VU 1 gets into orbit, and I need to recreate my steps. So I load up the ship again, same ship, same settings, but the first time, the stabilizers on the launch pad, the ones that blow up and it was kind of high off the ground, and I hit them in the wrong staging. So the craft was falling, and I panic hit space, and then it launched the boosters up. And then I forgot to attach the second set of boosters to that set of boosters, and so then I hit them like halfway through. Yeah. So
there's nothing like that moment when you crash, and you look up, and there's this nice little flower pattern of your boosters arcing off into the sunset.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing is, I had enough time. I hit the boosters, and I managed to make it.
Right.
And then, so instead of like, oh, wait, let's just fix that, I'll go back, I was like, no, I'm going to do the second one, and I just did it all the same way. I hit it in the wrong order, and then I hit it again. And so the VU 1 went up to meet the VU 1 because I forgot to rename it. And so...
So you had two VU 1s?
Yeah, so VU 1 was trying to connect to VU 1, and partway through I forgot which VU
I'm so confused.
I forgot which one it was, and so I was like, oh, I ran out of fuel, I need to redo it. And I forgot to rename it again whenever it got into orbit, so I had VU 1 meeting VU 1 after VU 1 failed. And so...
You realize if you'd renamed it, you'd have the VU 2.
Yeah, so I made another one called the VU 2, and I was like, okay, this one's going to make it, because I don't want to make it to VU 3.
And this is a horrible joke, but if you did launch a VU 2, you would have to hit the in-game version of London.
But, I wanted to do it by VU 3, because VU 4 is too many, and VU 5 is right out. So... I'm launching them up there, and I sort of got him in close to an intersecting orbit.
Right.
And, right before I came here, right before we started recording, I was like, okay, I'm going to do it one more time. And I was like, oh, they intersected. And I guess I was, like, while I was checking the orbit or something, all of a sudden, the music stopped. And I was like, why did the music stop?
What
and
music? You're talking about the in-game music?
Yeah, the in-game music whenever you're in space. And I was like, why am I not in space anymore? And apparently I must have...
I thought you were saying like your iPod ran out of juice or something.
Oh, yeah. It intersected at one point, but I didn't look to see if it intersected at the other end. It intersected at that one point and then crashed into the ground. So I was like, I didn't get it quite right. Like it was
apparently.
Yeah. I like left a booster on whenever I was checking that, and I was like, okay, we're good. And I was like looking at it, and then I go to just look at the craft. And I guess I had my booster on in a certain way, and I just completely, did a slingshot into the ground. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, just a word of advice. Any sentence that ends with the phrase, and then I crashed into the ground, you didn't do something right.
Yeah, well, unless I was trying to crash into the ground.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
But I...
So let me see if I've got this. You're talking, it's like an alcoholic, depressed Kerbal going through a really bad divorce, and he decides, by God, he's taking everybody with him. Is that your scenario?
Yeah. See, I would try to crash into Kerbin, and I would land on the mud. I can't win for losing.
Darn it! How did I do that? Yeah, I guess. Yeah, as long as you're trying to do the opposite. Well, I wanted to tell you. You mentioned a couple episodes back that you had run into a glitch. Where you said that you had gotten kind of like into when you were getting close to Kerbin.
Yeah, I got out of the pod. And...
Well, you said that as you were coming down, it's like your screen went black.
Yeah.
I hit that glitch.
Really?
Yeah. It was the weirdest thing. I was coming in. I was deorbiting, and my first indication that something was weird was I was not getting my re-entry flames.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I got all the way into the atmosphere, and I never had the slightest bit of atmospheric flames. So that was hint number one that something was wrong. But then the closer I got to the ground, everything just down there, just everything turned black. And when I would look straight down, there was like this glowing blue circle that had like a kind of purplish ring around it, like it was the planet core. But I could see through it, and the mun was on the other side of Kerbin, and I could see it too. And I kept using my wheel to zoom in and out, and, if I'd zoom in too much, it would be that black planet core thing.
Yeah.
And while I was doing this, trying to figure all this out, all of a sudden there was just... So obviously I had to reload, and that's when I discovered, oh, my last save was back when I was on Minmus. Nice.
This sounds like what a Kerbal went through at Woodstock. Like somebody handed him something, and all of a sudden you saw the planet's core.
It's like, stay away from the brown acid. But you were not crazy. I found your glitch.
Okay. That makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah. I also found, we always like to trade war stories, things that happen and would probably never happen again.
Yeah.
I had, this was last week, I had built a ship. And each stage, hey, and that was a good story too. Hope you enjoyed my story. I built a ship. Each stage had boosters on it, and I had the boosters going off in sequence. I was concerned that the way my spacecraft was built, the way my rocket stack was built, I was concerned that when I jettisoned boosters, that they might actually hit something on the way down. So those real tiny little retros that you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I love those things.
Yeah, I put some, and these are the small little boosters. These are the ones that have the yellow stripe on top of them. They're fairly powerful, but they're very short-lived when they burn. I put some retros on it, and when I ejected my first stage boosters, the retros kicked them out, and they arced away from the rocket and went to the ground, and it worked perfectly, exactly what I intended. When I ejected my second stage boosters, I was up in much thinner atmosphere. And when I ejected those, instead of arcing out and then going down, what they did was they started doing this just bizarre spinning. And instead of arcing down, they arced up. And they went up above my spacecraft, the retros ran out, and then all 4 boosters came raining down on my rocket and just destroyed it. And I was sitting there going, you gotta be kidding me. So anyway, obviously I had to rebuild. I went and I took out all the retros and I fired it. And when I went through it all again, every one of the boosters ejected and went clear of the rocket. So I was worried about nothing. I'd gone through this entire thing for nothing.
Yeah.
But I've never seen boosters actually go up and above and then rain down on a rocket. I've never seen that.
It's like your fortune cookie that night was a man's worst enemy is himself, or the tiny boosters.
Yeah. Well, that fortune cookie would say, and I'm talking to you, Biff.
Yeah.
It would be like real specific, and there'd be like the cook in the kitchen and be giving me the, like the mean eye. I meant you.
Okay, so something I experienced like in building rockets. First off, I learned the difference between just a fuel cell and the booster that would not take the fuel cell versus the one that could.
Right.
Because I just had a bunch of dead weight.
Right.
But so I would put, like on a rocket, I would have 2 decouplers vertically, just along the rocket, and I would try to attach something to both, and I could only really get it to attach to one. And so, like, theoretically, if you had, like the really tall booster, you could connect it to both.
Right.
And it would be stabilized because it would be connected at 2 points. It won't. Like, I can't get it to. So I was wondering, it may be here, and the feature may already exist, but what I was wondering is if there's any way that I could, like hold a certain key and click, because there's the little green attachment, orbs. Like that's where you can attach things. If I could just click like certain ones, and they would turn yellow or something.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. So you're trying to do a second one. I've run into that problem too. And I'll tell you what I do to because a lot of times when you attach something to the booster and then you try and when you attach something to the decoupler and then you try and add a second decoupler for like stability, it doesn't always attach. Sometimes it just basically hovers above it but never sticks.
That's exactly it.
That's where the what do you call them? The struts. The strut I can't believe I blanked on that. That's where the strut connectors come in real good, because even if you don't get a connection, it still keeps it butted up against the decoupler, and it won't move when you're flying. And when you eject, it will eject like normal.
Oh, so on the second decoupler, it'll eject the strut, which is connected to...
Right, exactly.
I didn't think of that. Okay, because I was just using struts to connect all of the different boosters to themselves, which is fine as long as I'm not going in at an angle.
Yeah.
Which I always am.
Honestly, my rockets have a tendency to almost look like sailing ships by the time I get done, because I've got a lot of struts.
Oh, okay.
I have a lot of
it looks like cables running all over it.
So it looks like the old sailing ships with all the sails and ropes
like struts. I don't know. In my experience, they're the duct tape of Kerbal Space Program. I just slap them all over everything.
Yeah.
I'm like, you just strut it together.
Yeah,
it'll work. So it's
and the thing about symmetry, because rockets, if you're not balanced, that's where you're. I don't care how many times you hit the T key, it's going to start to topple.
Yeah,
and if you're not symmetrical, you're going to be fighting that. If you can get it off the ground and get it into orbit, you're going to be fighting it all the way.
Yeah, I mean the best thing you can go for is if you're going for like a 2 symmetry to a 4 symmetry. I've never done anything on 3 symmetry and had it turn out okay, because I have to put the wings somewhere, and if you put 3 wings, it just didn't work for me.
Yeah,
maybe I'm just not at the level to where I can do 3 or something.
The only time 3 only works for me if I'm using. There's actually there's a decoupler.
It goes like 1 to 3.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the only time I've been able to get that to work. If I use that for one stage and then all the stages below it are coupled off of that, I'm okay. But if I try and do 3 tanks, I get into that problem with symmetry. And we move on now to our crew report. This is where we read your messages. Our first, this is from John from Minnesota.
Hi, John.
Hello, John. John says, what is the appropriate musical score for space travel and rocketry? Is it a sweeping orchestral piece that conveys the grandiosity of the cosmos, or should it be a kickin' rock and roll tune playing as your little capsule sits atop thousands of pounds of explosives? John from Minnesota can write. He says, I do think that Jebediah would prefer to be blown up while listening to Highway to Hell than some wafting violins. What do you think? What's the appropriate music?
Well, I don't think there's any better one-way ticket to midnight than some heavy metal, just riding a bunch of rockets. I think there are a lot of games that I play. Most of them are games that are in window, like FTL, or I did it with a couple others, like I did it with Nuclear Throne and some roguelikes.
Right.
You play it long enough, and the music starts to kind of run its course.
Right.
And you just, I want to keep playing the game, but I've heard, especially if there's not a very long track list, I've heard these songs over and over.
Right.
So I'll start to play my own music. And I'll find just certain things are just more fun to play with than others. I want something like fast-paced if I'm playing Risk of Rain, but if I'm playing something like FTL, it can kind of be whatever.
Right. I think the ultimate song that you could listen to while playing Kerbal is Light My Fire. Come on, baby, light my fire.
So I have 2 bands that I listen to at different parts in the game. I listen to a couple other things, but these just have been the most fun. So in assembly, if I'm just in vehicle construction, I'll play Blockhead. He's kind of an electronic DJ, and if you don't like him the first time, give him one more listen. I swear he's great. And
we're doing a plug here, I think.
Yeah. So if
I smell a plug.
Whenever I'm in flight, the reason I listen to just electronic music when building is because I may be reading parts or trying to figure something out. So with somebody singing or anything that's going to throw me off. Whenever I'm launching things, I'll do things with lyrics. And lately, the band I've been listening to is Diarrhea Planet. That is an actual band. The face you're making is amazing.
Diarrhea Planet.
Diarrhea Planet. They are the Andrew WK of garage rock. I swear it.
Okay,
Yeah.
there's another reference right over my head. Explain.
It's
Oh, I'll tell you what. I'm going to borrow a term from Reddit. Explain to me like I'm 5 years old.
loud rock band with 5 guitarists.
And a bad case of diarrhea.
A planet full of it.
Okay. And this is what you listen to while you launch?
Yeah, that's what, while I'm launching. You play some Diarrhea Planet, and you just listen to it. And
I bet they're all love songs too, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And you know what? Like, this is probably the closest they'll get to being mentioned on air. So you got to give it to them.
Diarrhea Planet. This is not the most original thing, but if I do listen to music, because a lot of times I like to just listen to the sound of the game. I like the rocket launch sounds. And
Yeah, like you have the option to turn that down.
Yeah.
I just like how just stupid loud it is.
Yeah.
Like just flying.
But if I do listen to music, I tend to do things like I'll listen to the 2001 The Space Odyssey soundtrack,
Oh, that's good.
especially when I'm trying to dock. And
Yeah.
I've got the Blue Danube Waltz playing in the background. I'll also listen to the Planets, Holst. I'll dig up soundtracks. Like for example, there's a movie that I really enjoy. It's the remake, the George Clooney remake of Solaris, and the soundtrack it's one of those things that you can listen to for hours on repeat
Yeah.
and not even realize you've done it. So that's the kind of music I tend to listen to a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, there are some soundtracks like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo soundtrack is another really good one.
That's Trent Reznor and Atticus. I can't remember the guy's
I
name.
believe so.
Yeah.
And on the Trent Reznor thing, there's also Social Networks.
Right.
Soundtrack is really good.
Yeah, and it's the same guy. And for the life of me, I can't remember the guy's name. It's Atticus something.
I don't know.
I'm gonna have to look it up.
Yeah.
This is driving me nuts. I'm gonna have to look it up. You keep talking. I'm gonna look.
Yeah. So there are a couple different soundtracks I'll do. Sometimes I'll do other games soundtracks. If you're looking for something that the Hotline Miami soundtrack is good for any occasion. Family gatherings, Christmas, whatever. Another, if you like the 8-bit kind of stuff, Fantomenk, Fantomenk. He makes a lot of cool 8-bit, peppy kind of stuff. Me, with the music I do, I kind of like faster, higher tempo stuff. And I either like my fast and my slow. So it's either all or nothing.
Atticus Ross. That's
Atticus
it.
Ross.
Atticus Ross. Okay.
I knew it. I was just holding back.
The problem is that I have read To Kill a Mockingbird so many times, and every time I said Atticus,
Oh, Finch.
Finch would stick in my brain, and I kept going, it's not Finch. But you know how you get that little war going in your brain?
Yeah,
where
yeah,
it's like, I know that's not it, so get Finch, take Atticus Finch and put it over there and tell me what the other one is. It's Atticus Ross. We're sorry that we forgot your name.
Yeah,
I forgot it.
They're both really good soundtracks, even
Yeah.
out of context of the movie. You just they're just really good to listen to.
That makes me wonder what playing Kerbal to the Downward Spiral would be like.
Oh,
Especially at the end,
Yeah.
where you crash and then he starts singing "I Hurt Myself Today." It's like, well, that has a whole new meaning now.
yeah.
I'm going to try that when I go home. I'm going to listen to Downward Spiral.
I
guess
I don't think there's a song and an album that better describes my Kerbal experience so far.
The Downward Spiral. See, I just use it to describe my life as in general. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. I guess by the time I get to launch, it'll be "Hey Piggy."
I'm actually really interested in hearing what you guys listen to. So if you can hit us up at Kerbalcast on Twitter or kerbalpodcast@gmail.com and send us whatever bands you listen to. I'll listen to them, see what they are.
This, I actually, you know how at the end of the podcast we always do the big question of the week?
Yeah.
I actually had thought that this might make a good question, and then John from Minnesota writes in and asks it.
Yeah.
So I think he was reading my mind.
Yeah. Whenever you forwarded it to me, I was like, "Oh man, I'm pumped to answer that one. That's a fun one."
And also, I've noticed that there is there's a thread about this on Reddit, and there's also a thread about this in the Kerbal Space Program website forums. So this is what I thought was this really original idea has been had many times.
Yeah, like, oh man, I thought of the best question, and then John tells you about it, and a couple other people.
But anyway, that message was John from Minnesota. John, we do appreciate it, and we move on now to
John Martin.
Come on down.
John Martin writes in response to last episode on docking and rendezvous. Here's what I learned after trying for over a week to get a successful dock. 1, don't even try if the orbits don't have the same shape. 2, if you need to catch up, you must be in lower orbit. If the target needs to catch up, you must be higher. 3, wait and watch the distance to target decrease. 4, as the target passes, distance will begin to increase. Immediately burn retrograde until the target relative speed reaches 0 or somewhere close on the nav ball. 5, point toward the target and burn. And 6, repeat 4 and 5 until you're close, then kill relative velocity and switch to RCS and dock.
You know, I am so glad that John Martin wrote in with this because I didn't catch this until later, but last week, we said that we were going to talk rendezvous and docking.
Yeah.
Right? Well, after we uploaded the podcast and I was listening to it later to just kind of review it, we talked a lot about rendezvous.
Yeah.
And then when we got to docking, I pretty much said, almost word for word, I said, well, I don't want to spend too much time on this, so what you need to do is line up the yellow circle with the pink target, and that's it.
Yeah, we said we'd cover it. We didn't say we'd cover it well.
Well, honestly, we barely covered it at all, but I didn't catch it until it was like after the fact. I was listening and going, well, that wasn't very much.
Well, I think it's because, like, right now, I don't even think I've unlocked anything for docking.
Right.
And I'm mainly working on rendezvous.
About the hatches?
Yeah, and I'm mainly working on rendezvous. Mm-hmm. And this podcast is about me and my struggle.
It's all about me.
But, yeah, we spent so much time talking on rendezvous, we never actually got around to docking.
Right.
So,
right.
And something that I'm definitely afraid of because I'm still working on getting VU 1 and VU 1 to sync up.
That's that Dr. Seuss story, right?
Yeah, one VU, 2 VU,
yeah.
red, blue.
Red and blue, thoo. Red and blue, Mary Lou, too. Well, but from what you've told me, you're making progress on rendezvous because you're getting to where your craft, at least, are getting closer. Which, with rendezvous, it's baby steps.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm realizing is, like, getting close is, it's like a little victory in itself.
Yeah.
You're not going to just, like, snap straight into it.
Right.
So there's degrees of passing and degrees of failure. And so you're just trying to reduce the amount of, the amount of failure and just increase your closeness to the target.
But here's the thing, though. In Kerbal, to me, there really is no such thing as failure because everything you do is a learning experience. And, let's be honest. Of all the games out there, Kerbal has one of the steepest learning curves I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's really... even for a game that just kind of opens up in sandbox, it's like a creative tool, and you can do whatever you want. Like you have to eventually learn how to use these tools to do more things,
right?
But you have to learn how to use those tools.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember when I first got the game, and I got it during because Squad has talked about this. They said that when Steam did their big sale. That's when they saw a huge jump in people buying the game.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing for me. I'd never heard of Kerbal Space Program. And I saw it listed under sale, and I thought, okay, what is this? And I looked at it, and I read some reviews, and I thought, well, okay, that sounds interesting. And so I bought it. And I figured, I got in, and I built a rocket, and I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. And immediately, it's like, oh, man, this is hard.
Yeah. It's like, okay.
This isn't like, asteroids or something.
It's not like you're given the Lego set and
Right.
you build the race car
Right.
and you're done. You know,
Right.
it's kind of like whenever they had the erector sets they would hand you,
Right.
but you weren't given the manual. It's like, okay, now build a crane.
Yeah.
Oh,
There
okay.
was the Guardian, the UK paper, did an article on Kerbal just recently, and they called Kerbal Minecraft in space. And I think that's very appropriate
Yeah.
because I've noticed that I don't build one rocket and then reuse it a lot. I tend to build a lot of rockets.
Yeah,
You know,
like,
it's
you
like
can make
it-
these little tweaks. And,
Yeah, it's like half the fun is building a rocket and figuring, getting it to stage correctly. And it's like every time I decide I want to do something different, I always build another rocket.
yeah, it's like you really don't. You don't start with one rocket and it levels
Yeah.
up and gains another
Yeah.
booster and it just keeps leveling up. Like you build it and it goes really bad.
Right.
And so you add some new stuff. And career mode really they tack that on. So
Right.
you'll have something and you're like, oh wait, no, I have more parts. I'm just going to scrap that rocket and build something completely new with the new things I have.
Well, what I think we'll do, since you're still working on Rendezvous, we will hold docking for a later podcast. When you get to the point where you're comfortable with your Rendezvous, then we'll start talking about the steps you need.
Yeah, I'm not sure when I unlock docking in the research.
Yeah, for the
so-
life of me, I can't remember the tech tree.
Yeah, so whenever I get home, I'm going to see how far away it is. If it's really
Okay.
far away, I'm just going to start working on it in Sandbox.
Okay.
And then, once I get that figured out, I can just go back to career mode and build my science up to do it there.
Well, when we get there, because if we talk about it now, by the time you actually get to docking, you'll be like,
I'll have to come back to this
what
episode.
did he say? I am curious about one thing. We did spend a lot of time last week on Rendezvous. Has that helped at all?
Yeah, it's I actually started using the maneuver node and knowing what it does now.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know that.
It's a helpful little critter, isn't it?
Yeah, whenever you set the blue node, like the blue target, and you do your delta V. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do your delta V for it. You need to exit out. Like you need to kill that one, otherwise it stays there. So I would see it, and I'd be like, "Oh, okay, it moved. I got to go to that." And I was like, "How come I'm really doing nothing?"
Right.
You know? And so I then read that you have to, before you put a new one in, you have to delete the old one.
Right.
So I wasn't deleting the old one. So I think with a little bit more time this week, I'll really get that part of it down, and then just each of the different symbols on the node using those.
Once you pass a node, once you actually pass the maneuver point, when you click on the node, a little red button will come up with an X, and that clears it. If you need to clear it before you've gotten to the maneuver node, right-click on it, and that's how you can get to the red button with the X on it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, let's move on. That last message came to us from John Martin. And again, John, thank you so much for writing in. We do want to thank everybody who writes in to us. And this would be a good time to toss in our email address. It's kerbalpodcast@gmail.com. And as I've said before, you can write to us, or if you would like to record yourself and send us an MP3, we would certainly love to play the audio. And we move on to our next letter,
which is from Bob Holtzman. He's from Squad. You may also know him as Kalisker.
Is it Kalisker or Kalisker?
I don't know.
Have you noticed that I'm always worried about pronunciation? It's like I'm always like,
Kalisker?
let's see, is that Steve or
You know what?
Steve?
It's probably Kalisker, unless he's from California.
Yeah, think like whisker, like cat whiskers. Kalisker. Well, anyway, go
Kalisker.
ahead. So Bob from Squad.
From Bob Holtzman from Squad, also known as Kalisker. I've been listening while I work, so I probably don't follow everything perfectly. And you guys seem to be having fun. Thanks for doing this. It's a great addition to our community.
Do you know when he sent this?
No.
This came in at about 12:05 a.m. So Bob was burning the midnight oil.
While at work.
While at work.
We're not getting him in trouble here. We're actually commending him.
Yes, Bob, you a hardworking guy.
And, sometimes you say that, you may have trouble following us. So
Yeah. So we had an idea. In case your attention starts to wander, we thought we would bring in a new segment, and we like to call it, Bob, Are You Listening? Hey, Bob, this is Big Daddy Love speaking, and I hope you're listening to this podcast. I want you to put your ear right against the speaker and listen to this podcast.
Oh yeah, you know you want to. And Big Daddy Love wants you to also. Right on, baby. Right on.
Let's go ahead and move on now to our next letter, and this comes to us from Run, Phil, Run. And that made me kind of curious, because I thought, Run, Phil, Run, my first thought was Forrest Gump.
Oh, okay.
But then I thought, there's another movie that could be.
Run, Lola, Run?
Run, Lola, Run.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
No, but I know the title.
It's a very good movie. Have you seen the Jason Bourne movies?
No, but I know the titles.
Okay.
I have like a movie blackout area.
Yeah.
Like there's a whole section of movies like, you haven't seen these? I'm like, no.
But I know the title.
No. Yeah, but I know the title.
Okay. Well, the actress that is in Run, Lola, Run is Franca Potente. And she was in the first two Bourne movies, The Bourne Identity and The Bourne Supremacy.
Oh, okay.
And she's in this, and it's a very clever movie if you've never seen it. She's got flaming orange hair, and it's a very clever movie. And one thing that you would like, since you're a big fan of Daft Punk, it's got a very techno.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, kind of early techno, early Daft Punk kind of score.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, that's my plug for Run, Lola, Run. But no, it turns out Run, Phil, Run is Forrest Gump.
Oh, okay.
So whenever we say his name, we have to say, Run, Phil, Run. Run, Phil, Run. You ready?
Seats taken.
Run. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Run, Phil, Run says, first, I'd like to make a plug for Kerbal Academy. And this is a subreddit. You know, we always talk about Kerbal Space Program, the subreddit, and we talk about the moderators and whatever. There is another subreddit, and I'm subscribed to this. And for the life of me, I don't know why I didn't remember to mention it. But there's another subreddit, and it is Kerbal Academy. And Run Phil Run says, like the Kerbal Space Program subreddit, Kerbal Academy is full of friendly and intelligent players, but has the sole purpose of providing help and answering questions. And he also puts a plug in. This is not a Reddit or not a subreddit. This is another website. And if you go to it, it's actually pretty cool because it's like a reference website, and it's called Kerbalproof.com. And it's got all kinds of neat little spreadsheets and guidelines and tutorials and things that you can download. So again, the subreddit, in addition to Kerbal Space Program, be sure and check out Kerbal Academy. And then the website that you want to check is Kerbalproof.com. And Run, Phil, Run. Say it.
Run, Phil, run.
Run, Phil, run. He says that, Biff and Nos, quote, are you looking forward to contracts and currency in career mode, and why? Personally, I'm a little nervous because I find career mode to be a bit rough as is, but I like how contracts could basically be challenges or goals to work toward. I like how, in theory, it'll help you make a reasonable progression through the tech tree without the only goal being for science. So, run, Phil.
The thing I'm looking forward to with contracts is, I talked before, the thing that really lit me up for the game was the career mode, because I was like, okay, short-term goals, get science. With these, with the contracts, it's like, okay, you need to go to the, one of the poles of Kerbin and do a temperature reading.
Right.
Okay, so I'll build all the things specifically for that mission. Okay, you need to go into orbit and, go to this level of the atmosphere and get a goo reading. It's like, so I'll do that. Or, you need to build something, go this far out and come back. I think that those have a lot of fun in mind because, you could ignore them. You could ultimately ignore them and play the sandbox. Sandbox will always be sandbox. But you have the option of just doing small missions, and those missions can have rewards to them on top of science. If by adding currency, you could buy something through science or currency, then it gives the player the option that's having trouble getting anywhere to get new science. They can just keep doing small missions until they get the currency to unlock whatever they need. And then they could use that to possibly get them where they need for science.
What this reminds me of, have you ever played any of the X series space games? Like X3, Albion Prelude, and X3 Terran Conflict?
No, those are new to me.
Okay. These are, first of all, graphically, these games are stunning. They are open world space games that they have a very dynamic in-game economy. For example, if you start trading a commodity and you flood the market, the price drops. It has a stock market, a stock exchange where you can actually, if you want, you can do the entire game, or you can get very rich investing in stocks. But the whole thing is that you spend the first several hours of the game just building up enough capital to get the kind of ships you need, to get the kind of missions you need, to build up even more capital. And what they're talking about with the contract and currency system reminds me kind of that. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think what they're saying is that one of the missions they would do, for example, they would give you a piece of technology, and it would be your job to test it out.
Actually, that could be pretty cool because, like they could have a contract in career mode in Kerbal where they're like, okay, here's the Science Pod Junior, in like you haven't unlocked it yet. If you in three launches manage to collect 15 science, you get to keep it and you get like a cash bonus.
Right.
So like you could unlock parts that aren't in technology tree, like you haven't reached the technology tree yet. You're like, okay, here's these aerodynamic wings. Stay in flight in the lower atmosphere for 30 seconds. And so you build like a little crappy plane and you fly it for 30 seconds.
Right.
And you fulfilled their contract and got their research, and they reward you by giving you that part that you don't have yet.
I know I had read in the developer notes that they said that that was one of the things they were kind of struggling with, because how do you assign somebody a mission if they haven't unlocked that part? But I think that may be kind of the direction, and I'm talking out of school here. I mean, I'm talking out of turn here. I'm not speaking for Squad. I'm assuming.
Yeah, we're speculating.
Yeah, we're speculating. This is speculation. I'm speculating that may be a way to unlock certain things.
Yeah, or they could just have you get to borrow these parts.
Right.
If you're trying for this mission, you can borrow these parts and you can do whatever on there. So if you deviated from the mission plan and you're like, oh, these are the parts I need to get to the MUN, and you bypass their mission, which is do 3 orbits and then come down, you wouldn't get those any extra science or anything you would do while you're on the mission. But if you did the 3 orbitals and came down, then you would get whatever the reward was. So doing extracurricular stuff on a mission isn't rewarded, so you're not taking advantage of it. So you're more focused on doing their mission within however much time, and if you pass it, you either get parts as rewards or you get the ability to buy parts.
One thing that I am that I'm looking forward to, and obviously I'll reserve judgment until they actually come out with it, but the problem that I've run into in the game on occasion, I love getting into orbit, and I love rendezvous, and I love docking, and I love going to planets and landing and all of that stuff. I love it. But there are occasionally moments, like for example, when you get to the MUN and you get out and you start walking around, there are these little lag moments where you go, now what?
Yeah.
And the idea that you could have a contract that says, you need to go to, a specific biome on the MUN and give me a surface sample, or, something like that, give you something more to do once you've actually gotten to where you're going. I could see that working out very well.
Yeah, and I mean, they could even, throw in just some good old Kerbal humor into it. It's like, you just need to make it there. It doesn't matter if you make it back, know? It's like, here's this really expensive probe. If the probe survives and makes it on the MUN, you're fine. Crew are expendable.
You're the one that made the Top Gun reference a couple episodes back.
Yeah.
One of the missions could be you have to buzz the control tower. And you get bonus points if somebody spills their coffee.
Yeah, you're fist bumping the whole time.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that letter came to us from, you ready? Run, Phil, run. And so now we move on to our next one, and this one actually comes.
Wait, hold on a second. What? So he had the 2 websites. Was it the one we pitched last time? Was it Kerbal Test Pilots?
Well, let's go ahead and plug all 3 then. There is KSP Testing. which is, like we said last time, think of them as digital test pilots. There is Kerbal Academy, which is, I have some experience with that. It's a very good site. A lot of good information there. And then a website. This is not a subreddit, but a website. And it is kerbalproof.com.
And we move on now. It's time for our mission briefing. Here's the latest news.
With NASA's involvement, Squad is now teamed up with educational specialist Teacher Gaming to produce Kerbal EDU. That is a version of the game that is intended for classrooms, and it would allow teachers to create set tasks for pupils. And here's the stories we're following on Twitter.
Astronomers discovered a Godzilla planet that's 17 times heavier than Earth, and evidence of the mysterious planet Theia was discovered in lunar rock samples.
Don't forget, our Twitter feed is
at Kerbalcast.
And that does it for our mission briefing, and you know what that means. And now, another edition of As the Kerbin Turns.
Honey, I'm home!
Hello, dear. How was your day?
Oh, same as always. My ship got stranded in orbit, so I had to kill and eat one of the crew just to survive. Say, I hope you didn't make a big dinner. I'm still kind of full.
Tune in next time for another edition of As the Kerbin Turns.
Oh, another great episode. Whoa. Hey, where's that?
That was horrible.
Oh, no, I think
that
it was delicious.
I
think it was
you
great.
Would.
Actually, I'm playing it again.
No, we're not playing it again. That was sick.
Some people have no taste.
Let's go ahead. Well, on that note, let's go ahead and move on to.
I digress.
But I digress, and we're going to be talking about the movie Gravity, and we want to throw in a disclaimer. This is one of those movies that you really can't talk about without spoilers.
Yeah, go ahead and just skip ahead around 15 minutes, and you should be going straight into the big question. Okay, so this was the second movie I'd ever seen in 3D, the first movie I'd ever seen in IMAX, and the first movie I've ever seen in IMAX 3D. So it was a really fun experience. They do a really good job of showing the scope of space, because like the very beginning, you spend a lot of time, especially in IMAX, you're moving your head around. You're like, what am I supposed to be looking at? I'm looking at nothing. And then you see this tiny little speck, and you fixate on it. And then, like, it starts to move in, and, oh, you're there.
Right.
And then the beginning scene where you're just floating around really captures the whole, you're kind of at the whims of, the loss of gravity.
I think, isn't it the opening shot, and it's continuous? I think, isn't it 19 minutes continuous?
Yeah, it just keeps going. Like, it's just one continuous shot.
And it's until, it doesn't break until the debris starts hitting.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Uh-huh.
That's what I thought. And, that's one of the things that I was very impressed with this movie was the pacing. Because what it looked like to me from the previews was this was going to be an action space movie. And that's what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And instead, what I got was very quiet periods of contemplation, insane action sequences.
Like white knuckle kind of stuff.
And then back to these very quiet segments. And the pacing of it is extremely well done because, if I'd had to sit through an hour or 2 hours of white knuckle intensity, I probably would not have enjoyed it.
Yeah, action exhaustion.
Yeah, yeah. But I loved the pacing in the movie. What did you think about? There's a lot of larger themes, bigger issues going on.
Yeah, there's some really telltale ones, like whenever she gets in the ISS and she's floating and like that one cord happens to come by and look like an umbilical and she's in the fetal position.
That was that the first, because for me that was the first moment where I really kind of caught on that they were shooting for bigger themes here.
Yeah.
That was my first hint that, there's going to be more to this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the most cool theme, like my favorite theme, is whenever you realize that, you see George Clooney and Sandra Bullock, and you're like, okay, they're both going to be in here the entire time.
That's what I thought.
Big name actors, they don't just, shoot out that early.
Yeah, one of them certainly not going to float away.
Yeah, and then you end up with just one character, and it's her. I thought it was really cool that it was woman versus the elements because that's not one you see as often. Mm-hmm. It's usually some guy and he's in a survival scenario, and usually if it's if there's a woman in there involved, it's kind of in a group setting, and it was her out on her own. And then there's the theme of her, coping with her own mortality.
Right.
Which, I mean, that's the thing that comes up in a lot of, person versus wild scenarios, is they really realize, like, how fragile they are and how precious their life is, whether or not they valued it before.
Well, I mean, I saw it as, the theme that runs through the movie is rebirth. Because when the movie starts, the Sandra Bullock character, Ryan Stone, if you think about it, this is somebody who has given up on her life.
Yeah.
She has suffered a terrible tragedy. She has her daughter was killed in a playground accident. And this is somebody who has literally just, I mean, she's for all intents and purposes, she's dead.
Yeah, she's going through the motions at best.
Yeah, she's just, she even says at one point, he says, okay, it's 8 o'clock. What would you be doing? And she says, I'd be driving. That's all I'd be doing. She's either working or driving. She's just, pardon the expression, she's just floating.
Yeah. Yeah, she's just coasting along on whatever.
Right. And when she enters the airlock for the first time, and you get that beautiful shot where she is in a fetal position and she's floating in a very womb-like setting, that is where you get your first inkling that we are starting to see a rebirth. The scene where she's in the Russian capsule and she thinks that she has no fuel left.
Uh-huh.
She dims the lights and she turns down the air and she kind of curls up and that's it, I'm giving up. It made perfect sense because it was so warm and so inviting. I had a sense that in that moment, when there really wasn't any option left, that really did seem like the most logical thing to do. Just dim the lights and just go to sleep.
Yeah, and just kind of embrace it.
Right.
Like, it just, everything is so overwhelming and the odds are so stacked against you.
Do you have do you own a copy of the movie?
I don't own a copy, but I saw it twice. So
okay, there's an extra on there. The radio conversation that she's having.
Yeah, I actually heard about that.
They have a scene where you actually see the other side of that conversation, and I have never watched that scene, and I don't want to. And the reason is, to me, what she's hearing on that radio is very dreamlike.
Uh-huh.
Radio transmissions, generally, when one's talking, you can't hear the other. The radio conversation in the capsule, the other person can hear her continuously, and she can hear the other person continuously.
Two-way communication.
Right. And a lot of times she will say things, and the other person will respond. And there is a very dreamlike element to it that I don't want to lose by seeing the other side of the conversation.
Well, I heard, I don't know if it was actually confirmed, but I read in an article that scene, the other side of the scene, is actually going to be in another movie. So it's just going to be a normal movie, and it's about like that family and what they're going through. And at one point, the guy's messing with his radios, and he gets in contact with somebody who doesn't speak his language, and he doesn't know who it is.
Right.
And it's the character from Gravity.
So I guess we're going to hear the barking from the other side.
Yeah,
the other side of the radio.
It'll actually be like a dog that learned how to control the radio.
Right. When the movie came out, there was some discussion about some of the goofs in the movie, and I did some online research, and this is what I came up with. The biggest goof in the movie is when George Clooney floats away. This is when they get to the International Space Station.
Yeah.
And she's holding on to him by the tether, and he untethers and lets go. They say that actually all she would have had to do is tug, and he would have started back towards her.
Oh, yeah, it would have reversed his pull.
But obviously the point of the movie was to get her alone.
Yeah.
So that's how they did that, and especially since they're going to bring him back later. Another criticism, the jetpack was too aerodynamic. I thought about that. When she was floating away and he flew up to her and grabbed her and then flew back.
Yeah.
That seemed a little too...
Easy?
Yeah. A little too aerodynamic. It just seemed like, that jetpack would have to have a lot more fuel and a lot more thrust to do that.
Yeah, he would have been like kiting all over the place.
Another one, the Hubble Space Telescope, the International Space Station, and the Chinese Space Station in the movie are all pretty much at the same altitude, and they're all within sight of each other.
Yeah, they're all accessible.
Yeah, no. They're at different altitudes, and they're different distances. When she gets to the space stations, both of them, and she opens the hatch, do you know how the hatch blows open? And it kind of flings her back?
Does it go in?
My understanding is those hatches actually open inward for that reason. The other thing that I heard, and this is the last one, the oxygen level that Sandra Bullock has in her tank before the debris even reaches them.
Yeah.
My understanding is that they would have already made her come inside. That you're supposed to have like an hour's worth of oxygen left. When you reach that hour mark, they make you come in.
Well, did they really show how much time she was out floating attached to that thing? And
well, I mean, if you take it as real time, by the time he comes and gets her, she's got less than 10% in her tanks.
Yeah,
and they said that she would have been much earlier. They would have made her come inside because her oxygen was getting too low.
Yeah, so I mean, if she was floating off for like a while, I mean, she may have gone through it, especially at the rate she was breathing. But yeah,
my sense is that the movie's most of it is meant to play out in real time.
Yeah.
But now here's the thing that I want to say. Every single one of these goofs, I don't care.
Yeah, you reach.
It's a great movie. And, I mean, none of this takes away from it.
Like, you reach a point where everything there is a plot device.
Sure.
And so minor flaws in the plot device in comparison to the story that's trying to convey, it can have flaws like that. Like, you'll notice in a lot of movies, like zombie movies, everyone gets super technical on the zombies and what they can and can't do and how they do.
I love that one.
And most of the time, it's a plot device. It's not really about the zombies. It's about how people come together or how people fall apart. I mean, if you were to take the movie World War Z and replace the zombies with Nazis, you'd have Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Like, it's so irrelevant what he's running from. It's about what he's doing, and what he's running from is himself.
You bring up Indiana Jones. That's a classic example. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, I don't care that Indiana Jones rides on the outside of a submarine.
Yeah.
It's a great movie, and that's just, that kind of stuff, you just go, oh, well.
Yeah, you turn a blind eye to it because it's not a movie about realism.
Right.
It's a movie that, I mean, Indiana Jones is trying to convey action and excitement.
Sure.
Gravity's trying to convey a message of, rebirth or acceptance or, facing mortality. They're not going to get hung up on how many bolts were in the hatch.
Right. Well, let me give you another example. One of my absolute favorite movies is The Dark Knight. I'll be the first to tell you, if you try and apply any sort of logic to that movie, it falls apart. But it's still a great movie.
Yeah, because if they were trying to make a completely realistic movie, then they wouldn't be able to do the sensationalism that the movie has.
Right. And, Gravity, to be honest, it does so much right. And it is it's a great movie in a technical sense. It's a great movie in a storytelling sense. It's a great movie thematically. It's a great movie metaphorically. It's just, it just works on so many levels. And so, it's like you said, the quote-unquote flubs are there for drama. One thing I did love right at the very beginning of the movie, when you're hearing the voice of Mission Control, and it's Ed Harris.
Yeah. Whenever I saw that on IMDb, I was like, oh, man. I said, that is awesome.
Yeah. Well, and you know what else it made me think of? When Kerbal came out with their little video announcing that they had added the asteroid redirect mission, if you'll look, the mission director is wearing a vest, and he's got the yellow hair crew cut that Ed Harris has from Apollo 13.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, and it's so funny because, Ed Harris has been in, he was in Apollo 13, and he was in The Right Stuff. And so they go and they get him to be the voice of Mission Control.
He has a great voice for it.
Yeah.
It's just like, honestly, it's iconic enough to where if you hear his voice, you're like, you're just waiting for orders to do something in space.
Question. When George Clooney comes back, she has dimmed the lights and she's given up, and George Clooney comes and bangs on the door. I had a moment of apprehension where I thought,
no way.
If he is coming back for real, this movie just jumped the shark.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah. I was having that too. I was like, really? I said, no. And then the moment she turns around, he's not there. I was like completely sold again.
Yeah,
because I was waiting,
like, oh, thank God.
I was waiting for a cop out.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan of like everything's fine endings.
Right.
I'm like, oh, everything's fine and dandy, you know. And
yeah. When he, that was my first thought. I thought, oh God, this, if depending on how this scene goes, I may suddenly hate this movie.
Yeah, like I'll either be pre-ordering it or pre-ordering 2 of it to burn them,
or I'll be just totally trashing it.
Yeah. My last point is the soundtrack is amazing, and you really notice like how well it plays in. So like whenever she's in, just constantly spinning, it's a whirlwind, and each time the Earth is passing over her visor, the moment like that song played, I was like, okay, I'm completely sold. This is just. At all points, it was a completely satisfying movie.
And we move on now from But I Digress, and we get to the big question of the week. This is something that we ask at the end of every podcast, and then we get responses from you. Again, our email address is kerbalpodcast@gmail.com, and then we read your responses. And the big question that we asked last week,
as all the mods move from Kerbal Spaceport to Curse.com, what do you think of the move, and is it good or bad?
And what was our first letter?
First is from MK3424. While it may seem like a better idea to let someone host the mods, I am worried that many mods will be lost because they've not been moved to the new site. About Curse itself, I have this to say. While the layout is great, I would rather see a direct page showing the content than just a greeting and a very small link to the repository on the top of the page. And I find that the mods should be sorted by date created as default, not alphabetical.
We also have another letter, and this one goes back to earlier in the podcast. As you recall, we had a letter then from Run, Phil, Run. He had written in and asked us what we thought about contracts and currency in career mode. In the same email, he also answered our big question of the week, and he said, quote, "To answer this week's question, I think the move to Curse is a good thing. The best part for me, since I don't frequent the KSP forums, is that I can subscribe to all my mods and get email notifications when authors make updates." And that's our big question for this week. Our big question for next week is,
of all the mods, which ones do you count as your essential mods? What mods would you recommend to other people, and the ones you wouldn't do without?
Last week's big question was about where the mods are. This week's big question is what the mods are.
Yeah, and eventually you're going to walk me through installing them, and then you're going to walk me through playing it.
Some of them are so easy, it's just drag and drop, and then some of them you have to get in there and replace, and the documentation isn't always really good.
Yeah.
So some of it's hit and miss.
I've only ever done a couple mods on games before, so
right.
Yeah. Getting back into it will be interesting.
I'm a big fan of drag and drop. And that wraps it up for episode 5 of Kerbalcast. And as always, we have a long list of folks that we need to thank. First of all, we want to thank you, anybody who has downloaded and listened to this podcast. We do appreciate it. Obviously, we wouldn't be here without you. Thank you so much if you have left comments about this podcast on iTunes. And also, thanks if you have sent us emails.
We also want to give a thank you to Squad.
And we do want to thank the moderators at Reddit on the Kerbal subreddit. Remember, there is Kerbal Space Program, there is Kerbal Academy, and there is KSP Testing. All very good subreddits if you're a fan of the game. And for the music
at the end of each segment is provided by Professor Soap, facebook.com/Professor Soap.
Don't forget, you can always reach us by email. That's kerbalpodcast@gmail.com. And check out our Twitter feed
at Kerbalcast.
And we will see you again next time for another episode of our Kerbalcast. Until then, happy Kerbaling!
So they don't get to see my face. They don't get to see the best part of all this.
Okay,
you pump up the volume.
Pump up the volume. Pump up the volume. That's it?
Yeah.
That's it! I said a hip, a hop, a hippie, a hibbit, a hip, hip, hoppy, you don't stop rocking the bang, bang, boogie, set up, chuck the boogie to the rhythm of the boogie, the beat, to the crash in the ground. And so now we move on to...
John Martin.
Well, I guess not.
Nope. That's all you get, John.
Thanks for writing in.